Hey guys, welcome back. So this week I think it's going to be all about mascots, since we don't really cover those too much. Obviously, the 90s gave us some all-time mascot goats like Mario and Sonic, and both of those dudes are still doing pretty well for themselves last time I checked. But it also gave us several hundred others that probably should have stayed doodled on a napkin at Denny's. Every publisher back then wanted a piece of that mascot money, and what we got was a landfill of mascot games that no one wanted. And some of their games weren't even that bad, but they just got buried under the hype or lost in an overcrowded sea of furry animals trying to get our money. So today we're gonna look at some Super Nintendo mascots that either tried way too hard, made some terrible decisions, or just faded into nothingness. And we're gonna start things off with the one mascot that perfectly sums up too much hype and not nearly enough game. Bubsy for the Super Nintendo was so overhyped that it never stood a chance at just being an average game. The year that Bubsy came out for the Super Nintendo may as well just been an entire event. The publisher, Accolade, was convinced that they had pure gold here, and they were determined to convince the rest of us of Bubsy's godlike arrival on the Super Nintendo. Ads flooded every magazine and comic they could cram it into. There were Bubsy commercials that somehow thought it was a good idea to make fun of dementia. And even a full-blown cartoon episode sponsored by none other than Taco Bell.
I know you still believe in me.
EGM, the game magazine, even created a brand new End of the Year award just for Bubsy called Most Hyped Up Character. It was the year of Bubsy, and all us kids could do was just try to contain our excitement upon his glorious arrival.
What could possibly go wrong?
Bubsy clawed his way onto the Super Nintendo back in 1993, and I gotta admit, this box is a pretty solid way to get kids interested. Flip it over and you get snappy little text blurbs full of Bobcat Tood, a bunch of great screenshots showing off all the stages, and of course the obligatory 16 meg cart flex, just to remind you that not even technology could hold Bubsy back. But the real question is, can this Bobcat possibly live up to this kind of hype? First impressions of Bubsy are about what you'd expect. You run around hopping on top of enemies to take them out, just like you do in pretty much all of these games. You also use your Bobcat flying abilities to glide through the levels, which you'll be doing a lot since this game actually has fall damage. And while your only real goal is to reach the end of the stage, there's plenty to pick up along the way, like yarn balls scattered around just about everywhere, and shirts that give you power-ups like invisibility and invincibility. The graphics at least put those 16 megs to work too, with colorful stages and plenty of enemies, even if most of them just kind of bounce up and down. But one genuinely impressive thing that the game does is that Bubsy was an early example of dynamic music in a game. The soundtrack actually changes depending on where you are. Like, listen to how it shifts whenever you go from this cave to back outside. Games like Banjo-Kazooie would eventually make this more common years later, but hearing it in Bubsy back in 1993 was actually pretty neat. But the problem really isn't the presentation or the music or even the general concept of Bubsy. It's just that it feels awful to play. Even your most basic movement, like moving forward, just doesn't feel right. Bubsy's forward momentum starts off kinda sluggish, but ramps up really fast, like hedgehog fast if you keep it going. But his inertia and the awkward way that he reacts whenever you're on the edge of some surfaces makes it feel like the game's almost pulling against you at times. And that speed creates another big issue. You can only take one hit before you're sent back to a checkpoint. And this game is packed with so much junk that you'll be dead before you even know that you hit something. It's like the game begs you to go as fast as possible while littering the stage with so many obstacles that you literally can't. It's what I call a start-stop game. You're always inching forward because you're just too afraid to actually play it. And these stages feel like they were designed for a completely different game than what the controls were made for. Now, I've talked before about sprawling levels, but Bubsy takes it to a whole new level. It's like they saw Sonic the Hedgehog's multiple paths and wanted to do that without understanding why it works in Sonic. In that game, you usually have a fast route and a platform-heavy route, both designed around how Sonic plays. Bubsy, though, just completely missed the point and said, what if we just put stuff everywhere? I've never seen a game branch into so many different directions for what feels like miles. And actually, you could probably play one of these stages 10 times over and never even take the same route to the end. Add in all that fall damage that I mentioned before in a game where finding solid ground can just be the challenge at times, and it's just crazy. And honestly, it's just kind of all pointless, since none of the collectibles are worth grabbing anyway. Thankfully, at least the exit's always easy to find if you just kind of keep moving to the right, but it's wild just how much random stuff they crammed into each one of these stages. So I guess the real question is, could Bubsy ever live up to the hype? And the answer is no, it never had a chance. That gap between the marketing and the reality of what Bubsy actually is what really tanked its long-term reputation. But even with its problems, Bubsy isn't as bad as people seem to make it out to be. If you like massive levels and ultra-difficult platformers, this might be your jam. Personally, I wouldn't say that it's anywhere near good, but I wouldn't really call it bad either. And the truth is that no game could have ever lived up to the absurd level of hype that Bubsy got. If you just take Bubsy for what it is, without the hype train blasting through your brain like it did us back then, and just go in with more realistic expectations, you might actually have a better time with this beleaguered bobcat than most of us did back then. Rocky Rodent for the Super Nintendo's so damn stupid that it's kinda hard not to like the little guy. Rocky here feels more like the darker side of the failed Mascot era. While games like Bubsy and Aero The Acrobat got plastered all over magazines in desperate bids to win kids over, Rocky and a lot of games like it barely got a whisper. If he was lucky, maybe a half-page preview in Game Pro magazine or something like that. But that didn't necessarily mean that they were bad. It just meant that a lot of them were a little misguided, I guess, in their mad dash to hop aboard the Mascot money train. And I think that's kind of what we've got here with Mr. Rodent. Rocky Rodent slammed onto the Super Nintendo back in 1993, and oh my goodness, this box art. If Irem, the publisher of the game, wanted to instantly kill any appeal that this thing might have had, they have succeeded. Not even the Japanese box art can save this one, though it's at least a little bit less embarrassing. And the back of the box isn't that much better, with a giant wall of text that sounds more like it's trying to sell you on a Sonic the Hedgehog game, and screenshots that honestly just kind of look pretty boring, with barely any sort of variety. So definitely not a great start, but let's see if Rocky can overcome a bad first impression. First off, before we even touch the gameplay, we need to talk about Rocky himself. Speaking of unappealing, just look at the state of him. He's like a rat that got run over, survived somehow, and instead of mercy killing him, Irem slapped a wig on him and made a whole damn game about this poor brain-damaged creature. Now, all Rocky craves is hot dogs and violence, and I need you to understand that he will kill a man for a hot dog. That's literally the plot of the game. Rocky is clearly an abomination of nature, but he's your abomination in what turns out to be a surprisingly okay Super Nintendo platformer. Yes, if you can get past the fact that he looks like something that should never leave a fumigated basement, you'll find a neat little game with a gimmick that I've never seen before. Hair. Yes, hair. While you're playing, you'll find hairspray cans and other stuff that give you new hairstyles, each with its own attacks and traversal tricks. Your mohawk can grab enemies and fling them forward, or let you cling to ceilings and then pull yourself up. You can also find a braid that you use like a whip and can even fling yourself off of grapple points with it. There's actually a bunch more hairstyles that are all pretty different, and to the game's credit, stages are usually built around whatever weird hairdo you've got. It's an odd gimmick, but Irem really went all in on this thing, and honestly, it's not a bad one. It's just stuck in a game that no one cared about. And while the game desperately wants you to think that Rocky is as fast as Sonic the Hedgehog, it's actually a pretty plotting game. You can run, and there are stages that have Rocky running down the freeway, but most of the stages clearly weren't designed for going fast. Plus, you can only take 2 hits at most, so you're usually better off just doing your hunchback walk through each level. And for the most part, they're all pretty easy to get through. It's all basic platformer stuff with a few side paths for goodies and the occasional mini-game, like using your hair to fling enemies into a basketball hoop. The rest of the stage variety pretty much falls under you using your hair to get through some of the trickier platforming sections. You'll also run into a few fun bosses, like a mafia goon on the freeway or a ghost haunting in an apartment building. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's all pretty okay. And despite what the back of the box might have you believe, Rocky Rodent is actually a decent looking game. The sprites are big and well drawn and maybe just a little bit problematic these days, but not unpleasant to look at. The real issue is the entire game takes place in city environments. It's actually one of the very few platformers that ever did this. But I hope you're a fan of endless streets, apartment hallways, and high-rises, because that's really all you're getting here. It's not a bad looking game, but after a few stages your brain's gonna be begging for literally anything else. Now, people in the comments are probably gonna have a field day with this, but I actually like Rocky Rodent. Is it the most amazing time that I've ever had with a mascot platformer? No, it's not. But is it stupid and ridiculous in exactly the way that my brain enjoys? Absolutely. It's peak 90s mascot game for me, a character so unappealing that no child or living thing could possibly want to play as him, yet somehow he's still got his own full game. But Rocky's decrepit state and weaponized hair at least kind of worked for me. And folks, let's be honest here. There are way worse platformers out there, and there's definitely not one of them that's all in on hair-based combat. So if you got an itch for a homeless rat who kills things with his hair, Rocky Rodent might just be the perfect weekend pickup. Aero the Acrobat for the Super Nintendo is one part colorful circus adventure and one part frustrating platformer. But for the most part, it still manages to stick the landing. So here's a random Jeremy fact that you probably don't know. I really don't like circuses. I hated the smell, I hated seeing the animals get whipped, and I especially hated the clowns. But since this was something that just about everybody went to back when I was a kid, I still got dragged to one just about every single year. Now, I never complained because I really appreciated being taken, but yeah, circuses they were not my thing.
Still the greatest show on earth.
So when Aero the Acrobat started popping up in magazine ads promising all of the fun of the circus wrapped up in a brand new mascot platformer, well, I can definitely say that I wasn't too excited about it. And with ads like this, I couldn't turn the page fast enough. And not completely because of the circus theme, it's mostly because I just wasn't looking for yet another big-headed animal bouncing around inside of a video game. Bubsy had literally just finished assaulting us that same year, so Aero was so far off my radar that I don't think I even noticed it when it came out. But despite my lack of interest, Aero still landed on the Super Nintendo back in 1993, complete with some pretty rough CG art. But I'll give it credit though, because this was actually before that style became common in video games. Flip the box over and it's my old nemesis, a wall of text. As someone that does graphic design, I can tell you that a wall of tiny text is not the way to sell a game to 10-year-olds, even back then. At least the screenshots look pretty good, but they probably could have fit more in if this section over here wasn't a complete novel. I don't know why so many games did this. But anyway, enough graphic design critique for today. Let's see if playing this bad is actually fun or just another mascot sideshow act. Flapping through the game as Aero is pretty fun, but maybe just a little trickier than what you might think. The basic controls are about what you'd expect, but you're not just slamming your bat butt on enemies here. Since Aero is in fact a bat, you'll be taking them out with your air dash. Though you can't just dash at will, since you have to jump first and then press a direction. The thing is that sometimes it works fine, but other times you'll clearly connect and still take damage. At least you don't die in one hit in Aero, but there were still a lot of times where my jaw dropped at some of the hits that I was taking. That same air dash is how you'll be getting around most of the levels, and for the platforming, it works mostly fine. You can even get a power-up that lets you chain 2 air dashes together, and that can be a lot of fun in some of the more trickier areas. But there's still times where you'll clip spikes on a platform's side when it doesn't look like you should have. And I'm gonna guess that that's because Aero's hitbox is probably just a little bit too big, which might also explain the wonky hit detection in movement and combat. Oh, and before I forget, Aero does have a projectile attack, but you need to collect stars to use it, and you have to be standing perfectly still to fire them. And in this game, standing still is basically just asking to get hit, so yeah, I didn't use this too much. Besides dashing around, Aero can also hover in mid-air to help line up some of the game's more precise jumps. And he's also got a whole arsenal of circus acrobatics that he can use as well, like being shot out of cannons, diving into water, and of course, riding unicycles across a tightrope. And really, I gotta admit that it is a lot of fun just moving through these stages with him. Even if I'm not a big fan of the circus theme, pulling off all these stunts is pretty fun. Aero's levels are probably the most interesting thing about the whole game though, both for better and worse. Now, most platformers back in the day were pretty simple. You just get to the end of the stage and move on to the next one. Here, you have to complete specific objectives before the exit will even appear. Things like making a certain number of star platforms vanish, or even just jumping through enough hoops. And believe it or not, I actually like this idea. Now, I've said it before that I'm not a huge fan of big open platform levels with no real reason to explore, since if the goal is just to find the exit, it feels more like you're just wandering through a maze. But Aero gives you a reason to check every one of those corners, since the objectives are just scattered all over the stage. But the downside is that there's no real direction. Stages go up and down and they just branch all over the damn place at once. If you skip just one area, then you probably missed an entire objective. And if you do miss those objectives, the exit won't appear, and it'll force you to backtrack across an entire level to find them. At least most of the time, the game keeps the objectives in plain sight, but sometimes you'll miss an entire group just because you didn't take some random path. I kinda wish that the game had just tossed in a simple arrow or something like that, pointing you to where the closest objective is, or even a basic map screen or something. But even as it is, it's still really fun to explore the levels and find all the objectives. And even when I was backtracking, I can't deny that it wasn't satisfying finding that last objective that I needed. It can just be a little tedious at times. At least it's all wrapped up in a pretty nice looking package. While everything's a bit on the small side, Aero and the rest of his circus freaks are drawn really well, and the circus theme does make for some colorful backdrops. Eventually, you actually break out of the circus, and that's when the game's art really opens up with some great areas to explore. I just wish it got there a little bit sooner, since being stuck under the big top for 5 straight levels feels like a little bit of a stretch, especially for me. But really, for as much as I brushed this game off as a kid, it turns out it's actually a pretty fun little game. It's not easy, and the combat and platforming aren't as sharp as they need to be. But once I got into the groove of it, I actually had a really good time with this one. And as it turns out, this is definitely not the Mascot clown show that I was expecting. And at least I can finally say that, well, thanks to Aero anyway, that I had a pretty good time at the circus. Mr. Nutz for the Super Nintendo may be a pretty good platformer, but no game deserved a name this bad. Mr. Nutz hit the Super Nintendo back in 1994, and look, I'm sorry, but there's no amount of decent artwork or 90s mascot attitude that's gonna save you from this title right here. There wasn't a kid alive who'd be caught dead picking this box up in front of their friends. And even if you could get past the embarrassment of it all and turn the box over, you're not exactly rewarded for it. Mr. Nutz is over here glaring at you like he knows exactly how bad his name is, and the screenshots, while they are decent, aren't doing much to appeal to anyone over the age of 5. But let's crack the box open and see if Mr. Nutz here can deliver more than just constant nut jokes. Get into Mr. Nutz and you're met with the happiest damn platformer that you've ever seen. And I guess I can't really fault it for that, because as you'll see, it's actually a pretty good platformer, but it's so painfully generic that it really feels like it could have come pre-installed on a knockoff console. But if you can get past all that, like I said, this is a lot better than you'd probably think it is. It may look generic, but it plays like a champ. You run around as Mr. Nutz, which is a squirrel if you haven't figured that out by now, hopping on enemies, jumping across platforms, and even throwing acorns, though you'll have to collect those first since you can't just rapid fire your nuts whenever you want. The stages are, for the most part, exactly what you'd expect, but the game does mix in some objectives sometimes, like finding keys to unlock cabins or even moving objects around to reach higher areas. It all sounds simple, but believe it or not, if you want a game that will genuinely test your platforming abilities, here's your game. The first couple of stages makes it all seem like it's baby's first video game, but after that, this game will eat you alive. Stages are filled with incredibly precise platform jumping, the kind of jumps that'll drive you insane with the accuracy that this game expects from you. Accuracy that you probably didn't expect from a game called Mr. Nutz. The bosses are no joke either, often taking well over a dozen hits to bring down while they just pelt you with all kinds of junk. And since Mr. Nutz here is a pretty big sprite, it's really easy to get hit by just about everything in this game. So yeah, if you're looking for a challenge, this is one tough nut to crack. And despite this game's initial generic look, this is actually one of the stranger looking Super Nintendo games if you just stop to look at it for a minute, at least stylistically anyway. I'm not really sure what they were going for here, since it looks like a mashup of off-brand Disney designs with some half-baked dark fantasy stuff thrown in. Maybe they were going for like a creepy storybook vibe or something? I don't know. It's also obviously very European, so I'm sure that has a lot to do with it as well. But besides the weird atmosphere, it does look really good. As mentioned, Mr. Nutz himself is big and well animated, as is just about everything else on the screen. The shading in particular is really impressive, probably thanks to the game's Amiga roots before it eventually switched over to consoles. But that's pretty much Mr. Nutz in a nutshell. It's a cool little game that I just think instantly got relegated to the clearance bin with how this appealed to no one. It's too hard for little kids and it's too cutesy to appeal to anyone else. But actually one of my favorite things about the whole thing is how the instruction manual tries so hard to make this cute, colorful squirrel seem cool and edgy for the older kids crowd, while at the same time telling you that he's gonna peg enemies and have a nut-tossing good time. People can't be this damn clueless when they're writing this stuff, right? Honestly, they just did this game dirty, because no game was ever gonna have a chance with a name like Mr. Nutz. And I know it's a lot to ask, but if you can just manage to stop laughing at the name for a little bit, you might have a great time playing with these nuts. And I think that's gonna do it for me this week. Personally, I was a pretty big fan of Mascot games back in the day. I mean, it was kind of hard not to be. They were just everywhere. It felt like 60% of the 16-bit library was just trying to copy Mario and Sonic's homework. But I really didn't mind. Most of them made for a decent weekend rental at least. And if I spotted a new Mascot weirdo on the shelf, I'd usually give it a shot. And looking back, it's kind of funny just how normal it felt that every other game looked the same. But I want to know what your guys' favorite Mascot games are, because I know you got one. So let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, give this video a like if it brought back some Mascot memories, good or bad. And maybe even a sub if you want to see some more of these forgotten mascots in the future. But that's all I got this week, kids. Check back next week for some more games to chat about. But until then, thanks for watching.